Today's topic is a little bit different. I've been covering important ideas to contemplate for the new year, and today I wanted to make more of an observation. I've been noticing a lot of young people that would stereotypically be more liberal-minded becoming conservative, and I just wanted to address some of the reasons as to why this might be happening from a consciousness perspective and an energetic perspective. So the first thing to contemplate is the speed of technology and how it's affected our brains and how it's affected our life. So when my parents were growing up, they wouldn't have had the experience of being on a computer every day, on having touchscreen technology in their pocket. So with this generation, with the millennials and younger especially, when I was in kindergarten, we had a bunny rabbit in the class. And by the time I was in grade 3, instead of reading buddies, we had computer buddies, and we had computer class. And even though they were desktop computers, it was a regular class that everyone was in every week. And we had at home dial-up internet. And then I think in high school, people started using MSN Messenger. And then shortly after that, everyone was on Facebook. And when I was going to university, so when I was 18, most people had a cell phone. And then sometime in my 20s, everyone had a touchscreen phone and tablets and all of these things. So when we think about the effect that that has on the brain, whenever a new technology is introduced to humans, for example, when humans discovered fire, it did change their body because people started cooking their food, and then their mouth changed, their teeth changed, their jaws changed. And so this is something where nobody could have predicted when technology started becoming more popular what effect it was going to have on the brain, and definitely people couldn't predict what touchscreen technology would do socially for people and what it would do to the brain. So once once everyone had a computer at home, and then offices turned over to using more and more computers, and schools turned over to using more and more computers, that's one thing, because we're still using computers primarily to do work. Like at school, we might use Microsoft Word to write an essay. At work, we might use PowerPoint when we're doing a presentation. But once everyone had touchscreen technology and people became more and more addicted to social media, to pornography, to not just video games, but like little computer games, to binge watching YouTube, to binge watching Netflix, right? Like when I was growing up, if somebody liked a show, they had to wait a full week to see the next episode. But then now people are binge watching series, and we really don't know what that does to the brain. There is research happening now. There's more and more research happening. But with this generation, there's more and more people with depression, like reporting depression. There's more and more people developing drug addictions. There's more and more people committing suicide. The suicide rate has been steadily climbing. And so what's happening in our brain chemistry with our hormones, with our decision making, with our impulsiveness, it really is affecting our life, and it's affecting the quality of our day-to-day interactions. It's affecting the way that we do work. It's affecting our discipline, like our self-discipline, and the way that we handle conflict resolution, the way that we handle stress. It's bleeding into every area of our life. And so what young people are experiencing for many, many people is reaching this kind of saturation point where normally when we're liberal, when we're young, it's because we're rebelling against feeling controlled, like being in a controlled environment or feeling controlled growing up or whatever it is. and we're idealistic, and we just want to rebel, and we want to be free, and we want to experience pleasure, and we want to like just explore the world and do what we want to do. But what happens is that rebellion is where being liberal is useful, right? Because sometimes when we're in a really conservative environment, there can be a kind of a point where we stop growing. And so as a young person, we're trying to rebel in order to take risks, in order for new circumstances to arise so that we can grow, so that we can learn and try new things and adapt, and so that there can be a new outcome. But when we're not rebelling against anything, it turns into excessive freedom. So this is where we are seeing more and more young people becoming conservative, because in lifestyle, not just politically, but in lifestyle, in mindset, because what happens when our life becomes full of freedom and full of pleasure, and we don't have a lot of responsibility, and everything is excessive. Like today, you know, if somebody wants to like go out, they're like, oh, let me get an Uber. If there's no food in the fridge, it's like, oh, let me, you know, let me order from Skip the Dishes or whatever, like all of these things that people are using. So it's like whenever there's an opportunity to take responsibility, there's an easy out, and it's becoming excessive to the point where young people, because it's the young people who've grown up with this and that where their brains are actually changing, it's them seeing the results first of how much anxiety people have, how much depression, how much kind of like feeling like something that used to make us happy doesn't make us happy anymore. There's more and more people who are just not being able to like grasp at the meaningfulness of situations of life, of relationships. Like there's this saturation point where people are hitting a kind of plateau and recognizing that this really liberal way of living where it's just excessive. And you know, when I went into first year university, there was a bunch of credit card companies, you know, trying to get young people to sign up for credit cards. So it's like you have this excessive technology, and then for the first time in history, all these young people are walking around with credit cards, even though most of them have student debt, and they don't know responsibility yet. Like they don't have a salary yet. So it's like a new gadget comes out, they put it on the credit card. They want to use Uber, they put it on the credit card. They want to order food, they want to like order groceries online, they put it on their credit card. And so we've just entered this excessiveness in every area. We've entered it financially, we've entered it socially, we've entered it with just like instant gratification, and the more and more we're experiencing like the meaningfulness of things leaking away, the more and more young people are going to swing towards being a little bit more conservative. And it really is an act of survival. And it doesn't seem that way. Like for a lot of people, it seems like, you know, an idea or a political preference or just something that they're trying or something that they've grown into. But it really is survival, because if more and more people are getting depression and more people are getting anxiety and addiction that they can't transcend, and having suicidal feelings or whatever else, it really is like realizing that the more conservative we become, the more inclined we are to follow, you know, a better schedule, to be more self-disciplined, to practice self-regulation, to be more conservative with finances, to be more conservative with the way that we socialize, to put limitations on things, and also take up responsibility. And the more and more responsibility we take up, the more and more meaningful our actions become, and the more and more we align with growing, like being more mature, being more emotionally mature, and people are sensing that they actually are feeling better. And it's not necessarily because they are, you know, that they have a political mindset of conservatism. It's more that having a scheduled kind of more self-disciplined experience, and then limiting our behaviors and putting boundaries, putting blocks, and living within kind of like a more tight structure in the mind and socially, emotionally, and just like practicing that is resetting the brain. It's resetting the mind to produce more happy hormones. It's helping people let go of addictions. It's helping people pay off their debt, make more money. Like, it's just helping people reset and not feel so out of control and not feel so overwhelmed by how excessive things are. So that's the reason for the swing. And when a person's life gets too conservative, where they're not taking risks as much, where they have a lot of responsibility and not enough time for exploration, then they're gonna come back a little bit to wanting, more a reach for something a little bit more liberal, because in the risk taking and in the a little bit more free time or a little bit less responsibility, the person will find growth, and they'll be able to transcend and move into a different season. So ultimately, a human, like in a single year, will go through natural stages where, there's certain times where they're working really hard and they want to like focus on something, they're driven, and then there's other times where they want to go outside and play. Like for example, a lot of people in the summers, they hang out more, like they go out more, and then when fall starts coming in, then like they buckle down and they try to work hard again. And so that's an example of just the natural ebb and flow of a regular person being a little bit more liberal and then a little bit more conservative. But with what's happening with our lifestyles and of excessive consumerism and technology and the way that it's affecting us emotionally, there will be a greater swing for more and more young people to become like almost hyper conservative, because they just notice that their life gets better when they take on more responsibility and they're more self-disciplined. So that tension in the long run, that tension between freedom and responsibility is where we want to be, just as an individual person, because that ebb and flow of there's certain seasons where we're going to be more focused, work harder, follow a schedule, take on extra responsibilities, and then the season where we're going to like let go a little bit just for change to happen, right? That's how progress happens, is new energy comes in when we let go a little bit, and then we can transcend, we can move into another stage in another place where something extra, like something different, is going to grow. But that tension between freedom and responsibility is where we want to live. So we don't want to swing too far into freedom, and we don't want to swing too far into responsibility where we're going to, because people with excessive responsibilities also can fall into depression. So the last area to contemplate for this topic is young people becoming more result-oriented. What happens when we're in an ideal frame of reference is we can have an idea, and often we can create some kind of template to reach that idea. So we can have a game plan, or we can set a goal, and we can decide on the steps that it would take to get to that place, that ideal place. I'm on a platform called Quora, a question and answer platform, and almost every week I see a young person asking, like, how come I can come up with all these ideas and I can set goals and do some kind of goal template, and I get all excited about this idea and about how I want to get there, and then I don't follow through. And it's every single week there's at least one person who asks this question. And so part of what's happening with the conservative, like swinging in the conservative direction, is the answer, the solution is to develop the conservative energy inside of us. So we might have a very liberal energy where we like to generate ideas and we like to have a plan of how we're going to get there, but actually following through means that we have to be diligent, we have to focus each day, we have to follow a schedule, and we have to be a long-term thinker and also a more realistic thinker. So we might think that we can reach a goal in 6 months, and then when we get to the 6-month mark, we realize that that wasn't realistic, that it's going to take more like a year, or it's going to take more like 2 years. And often, sometimes when we are idealistic and we get to that place where we act on something and then it doesn't turn out the way we expect, that can also make people kind of fall out of like wanting to act. But if we adopt a more conservative mindset when we're in that stage of, okay, how do we actually implement this? And we're disciplined, we focus on self-regulation, we focus on the long-term vision, and we understand that we're going to be disappointed when each thing doesn't work out the way that we want. Then we enter like a whole other space, because we can be liberal and then we can be conservative, and we can dance back and forth when the situation calls for each type of energy to be used in order to create the best outcome. So what's happening with a lot of young people is they're realizing that a really liberal mindset and a really liberal way of life, where it's just freedom, 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 pleasure, 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 not a lot of responsibility, not a lot of self-regulation, excessive consumption, excessive addiction, they're not getting the results that they're looking for. They're not getting to the places they want to be. They're not feeling the feelings they want to feel. They're not entering the states or the stages that they're looking to enter. And so when they start practicing developing their more conservative energy and focusing on hard work, focusing on, what's best for 5 years from now, as opposed to what would feel good today, then we're seeing the young people, when they're seeing the results, being a little bit more conservative, then they're becoming more and more conservative, because they're like, oh, this is actually producing results. And sometimes when we are more liberal, we rebel against a conservative perspective, because it's like the idealistic person says, well, this is where our culture should be. The conservative person says, well, this is realistic, and the conservative person is only shifting things that much, and the idealistic person wants it to shift this much in the same amount of time. And so the idealistic person says, well, you're not thinking the right thing, because you're not aiming for what would be best. And the conservative person says, well, no, I'm aiming for what's realistic, and we can actually make this much change in that amount of time. We can actually see the result. So if we stay in a very, very liberal space and we have idealistic aims, and then we don't move forward in our own lives, in our own personal experience, we don't move forward because we're shuffling back and forth between that ideal goal or that ideal outcome, and then also having a hard time working towards it, then we just end up not getting anywhere. As opposed to not getting to the ideal place, we don't even get to the little marker that a more conservative person would have gotten to by a certain time frame. So yeah, once young people are seeing that even though it might be slower than they want, there is progress when we start developing our more conservative energy, then there's more and more young people just swinging in that direction and becoming hyper conservative, and it's natural, and it's just, this point in history, we're going to see more and more of that happening. And then at another point in history, then liberal people are going to, there's going to be more and more people swinging towards liberal, and it just goes on like that. But in a person's personal everyday life. It's very important to develop both energies so that we don't get stuck in only freedom seeking, and we don't get stuck in no progress because we are kind of in a constricted space. So yeah, so that's what I wanted to cover today, was just contemplating that and looking at that, because it's just, I've seen so many more like young people that are stereotypically like expected to be more liberal, having conservative views and getting a lot of backlash. And yeah, and I think that it's just the time in history, and more people are seeing the effects of our hyper consumption and how it's affecting our brain, and we're just trying to reach for that optimal place. So to any young people kind of battling with that, it's totally normal. And if you start being a little bit more conservative in lifestyle and your friends kind of reject you, that's normal too, and that's okay. It's just part of the process of growing up and moving through all the stages and seasons of life and of young adulthood. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and I'm sending you lots of blessings from Toronto.